Okay guys, we are starting a new project this week and I'm going to make a couple videos to go over process and then how to create your piece, but in this one we're going to be going over what you need to plan and include on your sketchbook planning page for your project. We're going to be using clay to create a ceramic stamp. So it's going to be sculptural, and the stamp part of it is going to be, we're going to do some printmaking. You'll have a small piece to carve a design in. Your stamp and your sculpted handle need to have a theme, and you can pick the theme. It just needs to be something that meets the requirements for the project, and if you're not sure if it's going to be appropriate or not or work out well with clay, just talk to Miss Holland or myself, Miss Hinky, before you commit to it and really get involved on your sketchbook page, and we'll let you know if you need to make any changes or not. So you need to have some stuff, some particular things on your sketchbook page, and that would include what the requirements are for the project, the definitions of additive and subtractive sculpture, your process notes, and then a 5x3 rectangle where you're going to fill that with a detailed sketch of your plan, at least 2 reference pictures, a stamp design for the image it's going to stamp, and then you're going to label the parts of your sketch with the requirements so that we know that you're meeting everything. So, requirements for your handle. Your handle itself is going to be about approximately 3 to 4 inches tall, so imagine like you're holding this to push it down on paper after you've applied ink to stamp on your paper. So you want to think about, with whatever your theme is, could you have separate different sculptural items stacked and attached to each other to get that height, or what is that height going to be entailed with? And I'll show you some examples in a minute. It's going to be approximately 2.5 inches wide. And I'll show you why we need to have that in a second too. Your theme on your handle, what you're doing with the clay, needs to relate to the image that it's going to stamp. You're going to incorporate at least a texture. You should have opportunity to have multiple textures on there. And then you have to incorporate additive and subtractive sculpting. So what are those things? What do they mean? When you're creating a sculpture, and we're using clay this time. This is ceramic clay. It's going to get fired in the kiln. You are either adding things to your base piece. So I've got this tree branch that I'm creating here on this stamp, and I started with this coil for the main part of the branch here in the middle, but then I've had a place where the branch breaks off to create another branch there. It's going to be off to the side. I made this separate and I added it to the main piece that I started with. This would be additive sculpting. Anytime you're making things, like this is going to be a moth later, and you're sculpting them and then you're adding them to the sculpture, that is additive. So creating textures or details, aspects to the piece that you are making separately out of more of the material and then attaching to it. So working with clay like this is a perfect example of additive sculpture. Subtractive sculpture is whenever you start with all of the material and then you're removing some of it from the whole. So a good example of this would be sculpting with marble. You start with a big block of marble and then you're chiseling away to reveal what the artwork is. So subtractive is removing it. So think with this project, you're going to have some different tools that I'll show you later where you might be carving in designs or carving away to reveal what the sculptural aspects of your piece are. That's additive and subtractive sculpture, and you should demonstrate understanding of both of those on your piece, adding details to it and then also removing things away to create textures on your piece. Attaching clay, I'm going to go over in the next video where I show you working with the clay, but I've got the steps written out here. You should have these written down on your sketchbook page. How to attach your clay. You're going to make your pieces that you're attaching together first, and then you have to create some texture on both pieces where they're going to join together. You're going to use a paper clip to make little cross-hatching marks on the clay, which I'll demonstrate in another video, and then we use vinegar. We have these containers where you use vinegar, which is an acid, and that makes the clay liquid, and you will attach it together that way. You press the pieces together and then you use a clay tool, your finger or the brush from the vinegar, to smooth away the seam so that they stay attached. If you follow these directions correctly, then your piece is not going to fall apart when it dries. If you skip these steps, it'll stick while the clay is wet, but then once it dries, your pieces will very easily fall apart, and then it's harder to fix at that stage. Other things you need to have on your sketchbook page, you're going to measure out with your ruler a 5 by 3 inch rectangle. Everybody's pieces are going to be vertical for this, so 5 inches tall, 3 inches wide. And within that space, you're going to sketch a plan for what you want to do for your handle, for the sculptural aspect of your piece. I decided I'm slightly obsessed with moths, and so I wanted my image that it stamps to be a moth. And then I decided I'm going to have this like broken tree branch that comes up from the base of the handle, and I'll have moss and some little ladybugs crawling on it, some flowers and stones, and then I'll have one moth sitting on it. Okay. When you're coming up with your design for this, you need to remember that we're creating this out of clay. So any tiny little things are going to dry very, very fast, and then they have a high likelihood of breaking. So things that would be as thin as a thread or a wire, really thin little detailed things are not going to work well with clay. And if you've never worked with clay before, anything small like this dries pretty quickly. You want to start with the largest parts of your project first and add the tiniest little details last. So A, they don't get messed up while you're working on it, but B, they're not going to dry off really, really fast, dry out fast, and then just fall off. So start with the largest areas first and then move to the thinnest ones. Anything that would be thicker than your thumb, okay, right here closest to your palm, anything thicker than your thumb needs to be hollow on the inside. You can't have large pieces of clay where you're sculpting something that's a big piece of clay like this and have it be solid, or when we put it in the kiln, the moisture that's trapped inside can cause your clay to explode. Moisture is a no-no in the kiln. Other things you need on your sketchbook page. So you need at least 2 reference pictures, and you guys know we use the to print folder on It's Learning. You can go into print. It does work better on a Chromebook than on your phone to do that, but find your 2 images. So you're not going to go find a picture of the stamp you want to make. Your stamp should be a unique design that you're creating. But I knew that I wanted the tree branch as the main thing, the biggest thing, and then the moth was going to be pretty detailed too. So I looked up some branches that were kind of broken up, and then a moth that I thought the colors and the designs were cool on to use as reference. When you put them on the to print folder, remember these are going to go in your sketchbook page, so shrink them down on the page. You can add the rulers on to the dock so you can see how big they are, but shrink them down so that they'll fit in a small space like this. Then you can put the definitions of additive sculpture and subtractive sculpture wherever you want, just fit them in somewhere. And then the last thing we have on this page is the design for your actual stamp. So everybody's going to get a small piece of rubber like this. This is for printmaking, and we're doing a reductive process where we're going to be carving the design into this so that it'll be a functional stamp. This is going to eventually be attached to the bottom of the stamp that you're making out of clay once this has been fired. Okay, so this will go on the bottom of the stamp once we've carved it all out. So we will have some little templates and give you the measurements where you can draw a box down here on the bottom of your sketchbook page that's the same size as your material. And we ask, because we'll be carving some of the edges away to this to make it fit your stamp, if you lay a ruler on top of that space once you've drawn your rectangle, okay, so if you have a 2.5 wide by 2 inch tall rectangle on your sketchbook page, lay a ruler down, and you want to stay about 1/4 of an inch away from all of the edges when you're drawing your design. So measure in 1/4 of an inch, okay, from the side, from the top, from the other side, and from the bottom, and you want whatever your image is that you're going to make a stamp, my moth, I would want it to fit within that space, so I have some wiggle room when I cut this and trim it later. I'm not going to cut off part of my image. If you have questions about that before you start carving your rubber block, then ask. Okay, it is thick enough where you could have 2 different sides to try this on, but it's nicer obviously if you do it right the first time. So ask your teacher first before you move on. Those are all the requirements for your sketchbook page for this video. We'll have the list of the requirements on the slide as well. Check off that you have everything before you submit this page.